The morning started the way most London mornings do in early October. Gray. Not the romantic kind of gray you see in movies. Not the soft, moody gray that makes everything look like a painting. This was the flat, tired gray of a sky that had simply given up on color. The kind of gray that made you pull your jacket tighter even when you weren't cold. The kind of gray that sat on the city like a lid. Buckingham Palace stood against it the way it always does. Unbothered. The tourists were already 3 deep at the iron railing when the Hart family arrived. There were 5 of them. Dad with his camera bag slung over one shoulder. Mum already typing something on her phone with both thumbs. 2 younger girls who were doing that thing siblings do on trips where they find each other endlessly irritating without any specific reason. And then Tyler. Tyler was 14. Tyler was the kind of 14 that makes you remember why you found 14 exhausting even when you were 14. He had that baseball cap tilted at an angle that wasn't quite backwards and wasn't quite forwards, like he'd done it in the mirror and found the exact point between the two that communicated "I don't care" without actually committing to it. His hoodie had a logo on it that cost more than it looked like it cost. He walked with that particular shuffle stride teenagers develop when they want to look relaxed but are actually working quite hard at it. He arrived at the railing, looked at the palace, looked at his phone, then looked back at the palace like it had disappointed him somehow. Then he spotted the guard. The grenadier guard was standing at his post in the small sentry box to the left. Scarlet tunic pressed so precisely it looked painted on. Bearskin hat, which is not fur for what it's worth, and is considerably heavier than it looks, sitting perfectly level above a face that gave away absolutely nothing. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He wasn't looking at anything exactly. He was doing that thing that very trained people do, the thing that takes years to learn, where the eyes are open and the body is present, but the mind has been placed somewhere else entirely. Somewhere unreachable. Somewhere the public cannot touch. He had been at this post since 6 in the morning. He had stood in the rain the previous 3 days. He had done this on his birthday. He had done this while ill. He had done this the week his grandmother died, standing in the cold with the news sitting inside him like a stone, and he had not moved, and nobody had known. None of the tourists knew any of this. None of them would have asked. Tyler looked at the guard the way people look at things they've decided are props. It started small. It always starts small. Tyler waved. A big, theatrical wave. Nothing happened. The guard stared through the middle distance like Tyler was a slight variation in the air pressure. Tyler turned to his younger sisters and grinned. See? Nothing. He tried again. Bigger this time. He leaned into the railing and did a kind of salute. A mocking one, the elbow at a weird angle, hand flopping loosely at his forehead. A couple of tourists nearby glanced over. One of them smiled. Not a kind smile. The kind of smile people give when they want to watch something play out. The guard did not move. Tyler took this as encouragement. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, not loudly, but loudly enough. Loud enough for the people nearby to hear, which was the point. "Hello? Is anyone in there?" A few people laughed. Tyler's dad lowered his camera. "Just for a second." "Put it back up." The guard stared at nothing. Tyler started doing an impression. He straightened up, exaggerated, ridiculous, and began marching in place with his arms swinging at his sides, chin jutting out, doing a sort of mechanical stomp that was clearly supposed to be mocking the guard's precision. His younger sisters giggled. A tourist with an American accent leaned over to their friend and said something, and they both laughed. Tyler was performing now. This is the thing about performing. Once you have an audience, stopping feels like losing. He turned to the crowd with his hands out, playing up the bit. "Look at this statue. Is this a real person? Someone check." He started narrating, doing a voice, low and robotic, pretending to be the guard answering questions about whether he was alive. The crowd had grown a little, a small knot of people watching. He called the guard a toy soldier. He asked if someone wanted to buy one. He walked along the railing doing the impression, glancing back at the guard to check that the guard was still doing nothing, using the nothing as fuel. One woman near the back of the crowd quietly took a step away from the group. She had seen something in the guard's posture that Tyler had not. There is a threshold, not a legal one, not a verbal one, not a line drawn on the pavement with instructions on either side. It is not written down anywhere that the public can read. It exists inside the protocols that guards are trained under, protocols that govern when stillness becomes movement, when observation becomes action, when the ceremonial becomes operational. The threshold is real. Tyler had been walking toward it for the last 4 minutes. He didn't know this. He kept going. He put his hands on the railing and leaned in, closer than you're supposed to, close enough that the physical distance between them had become part of the performance. And at some point in the middle of another joke about whether there was a real human face somewhere under the bearskin hat, something happened. The guard moved. Not a flinch, not a twitch. The head turned, slowly, like something mechanical that has been calibrated for precision rather than speed. It turned with the kind of deliberateness that makes you realize, in the back of your brain, that whoever this is, they have never once done anything by accident. His eyes found Tyler, not the railing, not the crowd, Tyler specifically, with the absolute unhurried accuracy of someone who had identified exactly where the problem was and was now simply looking at it. The guard opened his mouth. Make way for the Queen's Guard. Not a shout. This is what nobody in the crowd expected. It was not a shout, it was a parade ground voice used at something close to a normal volume, which somehow made it worse. A voice that had been trained to carry across open ground, across wind and rain and ceremony, deployed here in this morning quiet, like a key turning in a lock. He stepped forward. One boot, then the other. The rifle held at his shoulder, his back straight in a way that made every other person at that railing seem to have the spine of a wet sock by comparison. He was walking. He was walking with complete, unhurried certainty, and he was walking directly toward Tyler, not aggressively. That is not the right word, inevitable. He was walking inevitably. Tyler stumbled back from the railing. It was not graceful. One foot caught the other, and he grabbed the first thing his hand found, which was his mother's arm, and she made a startled sound that she did not mean to make. He didn't fall. He just went backwards. Not a fall, a retreat dressed up as a stumble. The crowd did not laugh. The crowd that had been laughing 23 seconds ago went quiet. Not politely quiet. Not the quiet of people being respectful. The sudden total quiet that falls when something cuts through the noise of a moment and makes everyone realize that the thing they thought was funny was not actually funny. It was just a kid doing something that the kid did not understand the full dimensions of. Tyler's dad lowered the camera. He did not put it back up. Tyler's mum took her thumb off the phone screen and looked at her son. The two younger sisters, who had been mid-elbow jab at each other, went still. The tourist with the American accent stopped laughing. The person filming on their phone kept filming, but they stopped narrating. The guard completed the route, 10 paces. A turn, a sharp geometric turn, the kind that requires the whole body to commit at once. 10 paces back. He reached his post. He squared his shoulders. He returned his eyes to the middle distance. And that was it. That was the whole thing. No further words. No consequence. No waiting to see what Tyler would do. No satisfaction from looking at the boy again. The guard was already somewhere else in his mind, already back inside the stillness, already unreachable. The crowd stood there for a moment. Then it started to dissolve. Not all at once, but the way crowds do when the thing that gathered them has ended, when people begin to remember they were going somewhere, when the shared attention breaks up into individual people, each with their own morning to get back to. Nobody came up to Tyler and said anything. Nobody said that was harsh, or don't worry about it, or he does that to everyone. They just left. Tyler was still standing 3 feet from the railing. His cap was slightly off angle from when he'd grabbed his mum's arm. His face was doing something complicated. Not crying, not embarrassed in the way that leads to a joke, just sitting in an expression that didn't have a name, the kind of face a person makes when they've been shown something about themselves in front of an audience and the information hasn't finished arriving yet. His dad stood next to him, said nothing. There are parents who would have said something in that moment, something that made it smaller, that translated it into a lesson with clear edges, that let the kid off the hook of the feeling while still technically delivering the point. Most parents reach for that because silence is uncomfortable and because watching your kid feel something difficult is hard even when it's necessary. Tyler's dad was quiet. He put the camera away in the bag, clicked the strap closed, looked at the palace for a moment, at the guard standing motionless at his post, at the tourists replacing the ones who'd just left, at the sky above all of it still doing its flat, committed gray thing. He put his hand briefly on the back of his son's neck, not a squeeze, not a lesson, just a hand, and then he walked toward the gate to continue the visit. Tyler followed. He didn't look back at the guard. He didn't speak for the rest of the morning. Here is what Tyler did not know about the man standing in the sentry box. His name doesn't matter here. What matters is what he was. He had been in the army since he was 17. He had done one tour in a place where the days were either very long and very boring, or very short and very loud, with nothing in between. He had come back with the kind of posture you can't manufacture in a gym, and a way of sitting still in a room that his friends found unsettling before they got used to it. He had applied for the Household Division, which is the collection of regiments responsible for guarding the royal residences, and he had gone through the selection process, which included physical standards, drill standards, turnout standards, and a particular kind of mental endurance that is harder to measure but very easy to identify when it's absent. The bearskin hat weighs 1.5 pounds. He wore it for hours at a stretch. The ceremonial uniform, the scarlet tunic, the white gloves, the boots that have been polished until they reflect like water, is not a costume. It is a uniform of an active-duty soldier. Underneath the ceremony is the same training, the same rank structure, the same obligations as any other unit. He was not standing there because no other job was available. He was standing there because he had been selected to stand there, and because he understood what it meant, and because the understanding had nothing to do with whether tourists found it impressive. He had stood at that post in weather that would send most people straight back to the hotel. He had watched thousands of Tylers in his time. Not unkindly. He didn't carry contempt for them. Kids do kid things. People who don't understand something tend to treat it like it doesn't matter. This is ordinary human behavior. He understood it, but there was a protocol, and when the protocol was triggered, he followed it. That's what it means to be trained. The woman who had stepped away from the crowd, right at the beginning, before the guard moved, before Tyler stumbled, was a retired teacher from Leeds who had been bringing Year 8 students to London for field trips for over 2 decades. She had seen enough Year 8 students in her time to read the room. She had watched Tyler start his little performance and immediately understood where it was going, not because she'd seen exactly this before, but because she'd seen 1,000 versions of it. The mechanics of it were always the same. A kid who had decided that the gap between himself and a consequence was large enough to play in. A crowd that had laughed just enough to become the audience the kid needed. The slow escalation that the kid experienced as confidence and that everyone else experienced as a slow-motion problem. She stepped back because she didn't want to be part of the audience. Not out of judgment. She'd taught too many Tylers to feel judgment. She just didn't want to contribute the laugh, the look, the energy of watching, the thing that tells a performing kid keep going. When the guard moved, she wasn't surprised. When Tyler stumbled back and grabbed his mum, and the crowd went quiet, she felt something that wasn't quite satisfaction, and wasn't quite sympathy, more like recognition. The specific, quiet recognition of someone watching a lesson land. She stood there for another moment, watching the guard complete his route and return to his post and go still again. Then she went to find a cup of tea. There is a version of this story where Tyler is the villain. It's a tempting version. Entitled kid, patient soldier, satisfying reversal. The crowd that laughed at the guard ends up silent. The boy who thought the rules didn't apply to him gets shown, in front of an audience, that they do. Clean, moral, done. But that version isn't quite accurate. Because Tyler was 14. 14 is not a fixed character. 14 is a draft. The brain at 14 is in the middle of a renovation so significant that neuroscientists spend entire careers just mapping it. The prefrontal cortex, which is the part responsible for thinking how will this look to other people, and what are the actual consequences of this action, and is this a good idea, is not finished building itself until a person is in their mid-20s. This is not an excuse. It is a fact. 14 does things that 25 looks back on and physically winces over, not because 14 was a bad person, but because 14 was operating with incomplete equipment. The crowd that laughed at Tyler's impression wasn't full of bad people either. People laugh at things in crowds that they wouldn't laugh at alone. The social pressure of a shared moment is real. When the person next to you laughs, your brain registers it and adjusts your own response toward laughter, even when you didn't find the thing funny to start with. This is not weakness. It is how human beings have synchronized with each other since before we had language. And the guard. The guard wasn't making a statement. He wasn't teaching Tyler a lesson. He wasn't even, in any real sense, responding to Tyler personally. He was following a protocol that exists for reasons that have nothing to do with whether a tourist is being annoying. The protocol is about the route. It is about the integrity of the ceremonial post. It is about the fact that the area in front of the sentry box has a defined ceremonial path, and that path must be kept clear, and when it is not kept clear, the guard moves to clear it. Tyler didn't know this. Tyler thought he was dealing with a statue. He found out he was dealing with a soldier. Later that afternoon, the family was in a cafe in St. James's Park, one of those places with small tables and overpriced sandwiches and the kind of low hum of other people's conversations that makes your own conversation feel somehow protected. Tyler was having a hot chocolate. He hadn't talked much since the morning. Not sullen, at least not obviously sullen. More like he was running something through his head that kept coming up without an answer, and he wasn't sure how to ask the question. His dad was looking at the photos from the morning on the camera screen, scrolling through them, and he stopped on one and held the camera up. The guard. Not the moment with Tyler, just a photo he'd taken before any of it, when they'd first arrived. The guard at his post in the morning light, the sentry box behind him, the palace blurred in the background. A still, composed shot, the kind of thing you'd see on a postcard. "Look how still he is," his dad said. Not to Tyler specifically. To the table. Tyler looked at the photo. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "He's actually a real soldier, yeah? Not just like a costume thing. Active duty, yeah." Tyler held his hot chocolate in both hands and looked at the photo a bit longer. "So he's done, like, actual stuff." "Most of them have, yeah." Another silence. The cafe did its cafe thing around them. "I didn't know that," Tyler said. His dad put the camera down and picked up his coffee. "Most people don't." That was the end of the conversation. No lecture after it. No, and that's why you should always, or next time, maybe consider, or how do you think he felt? Just the 2 sentences, and then the sound of other people's lunches, and the park outside the window with its ducks and its joggers and its October trees. Tyler finished his hot chocolate, didn't say anything else about the morning. But when they walked back past the palace on the way to the tube, he looked at the guard from a distance. He didn't go to the railing. He just looked, for a moment, at the stillness of it, the absolute, trained stillness of someone doing a job that looks simple from the outside and is, in fact, one of the hardest things there is. He didn't wave, he kept walking. There's a thing that happens sometimes, with moments like this one. The moment happens, the crowd watches, the guard moves, the kid stumbles, the silence falls, and then everyone disperses and goes back to their lives, and the whole thing is over in 4 minutes, and mostly forgotten by lunch. Except for the people filming. There were at least 3 phones recording when the guard stepped forward. At least 3 people whose immediate instinct, before the crowd had even finished going quiet, was to make sure the thing was captured. Because that's what you do now. When something happens, you make sure you have proof that it happened, so that later, from the safety of your own house, you can share the proof with people who weren't there, so they can feel like they were. The footage went up that evening. It was not the most dramatic thing on the internet that week. It was not even the most dramatic footage of a Royal Guard encounter that month. This kind of thing happens fairly regularly, and the clips circulate with reliable consistency, because there is something about the combination of guard immovability and public obliviousness that the internet finds endlessly watchable. But this one moved around. Hundreds of thousands of views by the next morning. Comments in about 6 languages. People arguing in the comments about whether the guard was right to do what he did. People arguing about whether Tyler was the villain or just a kid. People who had clearly not watched the full clip, making confident statements about what happened. People who had watched the full clip, making confident statements that disagreed with each other entirely. Tyler's face was partially obscured by the cap, and the angle of filming caught mostly his back. You couldn't quite identify him from the footage. He didn't know the video existed until 2 days later, when a kid from school sent it to him. He watched it twice. He didn't respond to the message. What the video doesn't show, because no video of any moment shows this, is everything that was happening inside the 5 members of the Hart family during those 4 minutes. It doesn't show that Tyler's dad had been having a quietly terrible week at work, the kind of week that doesn't have one big dramatic moment, but just a series of small, grinding disappointments that pile up without anywhere to go, and that he had been looking forward to this trip as a reset, as a couple of days of being a dad in a city he loved, and that watching his son perform for strangers had lodged something uncomfortable in his chest that he hadn't fully named yet. It doesn't show that Tyler's mom had noticed the guard doing the same still precise thing she was doing, managing the surface while something else ran underneath, and had felt, briefly and unexpectedly, a weird kind of solidarity with a stranger in a bearskin hat. It doesn't show that the younger of Tyler's 2 sisters, who was 9, had found the whole thing frightening in a way she couldn't articulate. Not scary frightening, more like the feeling of a dream where the rules change without warning. She had watched her brother be big and loud and in charge of a crowd, and then she had watched him go small in 2 seconds, and the speed of it had done something strange to her understanding of how size and loudness actually worked. She thought about it for days afterwards. She never mentioned it to Tyler. It doesn't show that the guard, in the brief pause between routes, had registered Tyler the way he registered every person who pushed past the ordinary, with a specific, professional attention, and had made the calculation that most experienced guards make dozens of times a day. The calculation that sits in the space between this is within tolerance, and this requires a response, and had waited, with complete patience, until the second was true. It doesn't show any of that. It shows a kid being daft, and a guard walking toward him, and a crowd going quiet. That's all any video ever shows. There are 2 questions this kind of story tends to generate, and they are worth sitting with, because they are more complicated than they first appear. The first question is, was Tyler a bad kid? And the honest answer is, no. Not particularly. He was a kid doing a thing that kids do when they have an audience, and no immediate consequences, and a rough understanding of where the line is, but not a perfect one. The line, in this case, was further from where he was standing than he realized, and then all at once it was closer, and that's how that kind of learning tends to work. It's not elegant, it's not comfortable, but it's also not evidence of a broken person. It's evidence of an unfinished one. Most of us, if we're honest, have some version of Tyler in our history, a moment we performed for the wrong audience, a line we walked right up to without realizing where it was going, until something on the other side of it showed us. The only difference is that most of us didn't have someone filming it. The second question is, did the guard enjoy it? And the honest answer is also no. Not in the way the internet version of this story tends to imply. The satisfying reversal, the soldier putting the brat in his place, the justice. That is a story we impose on the moment, because it feels good, because we like it when consequences arrive, and we like it even more when they arrive in front of witnesses. But the guard was not performing. Tyler was performing. The guard was working. There is a difference. The performing person needs an audience. The working person is indifferent to one. When the guard stepped forward, he was not thinking about how it would look. He was not thinking about whether Tyler would learn something. He was following a protocol, completing a task, and returning to his post. The lesson, if there was one, was accidental, which, in a way, makes it more powerful. The most significant lessons often are. The last thing worth saying about this morning, about this gray October morning at the iron railing outside Buckingham Palace, is something about silence. Not the silence that fell over the crowd when the guard moved. Not the silence Tyler carried around for the rest of the day. Something else. The silence the guard keeps, at his post. Hour after hour, tourist after tourist, laugh after laugh. The endless, ordinary procession of people who pass through, who look at him the way you look at a display, who take their photos and move on without giving him much more thought than they give the architecture. It takes something to stand in that silence and not be diminished by it. Not stubbornness, not ego. Something quieter than both of those. Something that has made its peace with being looked at without being seen, with being in a crowd without being part of one, with performing a function so specific and so strange that nobody outside of a small, specific professional community fully understands what it costs. Most of us spend our lives trying to be seen, trying to make noise that lands, trying to do the thing that makes the crowd look and laugh and pay attention. There is a very small number of people who have found a different way, who have turned the not moving into something stronger than the moving, who have taken the stillness that the world mistakes for emptiness, and filled it with something the world doesn't have a word for. The guard stood at his post. The tourists kept coming. The gray sky held. Tyler had his hot chocolate. And somewhere on the internet, the video was still loading on 1,000 different phones, each person watching it from their own position, deciding what it meant, what Tyler deserved, what the guard was like as a person, what the whole thing said about anything. None of them asked the guard. He wouldn't have told them if they had. He was back at his post by then, still, facing forward, somewhere else in his mind, unreachable. The Grenadier Guards and other regiments of the Household Division are active-duty British Army soldiers. The protocols governing their conduct at royal residences, including when they may issue verbal commands and advance on members of the public who block ceremonial routes, are real, documented, and have been triggered in numerous incidents that have been filmed and widely viewed. The stillness is trained. The movement, when it comes, is authorized. The distinction between the two is the entire point. SEO or description give me. Here are both, an SEO title description set and a YouTube-style description block, written to match the tone of the story. SEO title options. Entitled Kid Mocked the Royal Guard. Seconds later. Everyone regretted it. Boy taunts Buckingham Palace guard in front of a crowd. What happened next? Shocked everyone. Tourist kid pushes the royal guard too far. The guard's response left the crowd speechless. Meta description, 150 to 160 characters, for Google blog. A teenage boy decided to mock a royal guard at Buckingham Palace, in front of a crowd. 4 seconds later, nobody was laughing anymore. What happens when a kid decides the royal guard is just a statue in a fancy costume? On an ordinary October morning outside Buckingham Palace, one boy found out, in front of a full crowd of tourists, with cameras rolling. It started with a wave, then a mocking impression, then jokes loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The crowd laughed. The guard didn't move. And that stillness, that total, trained, absolute stillness, was something the boy badly misread. In this video, we walk through the full real-life story, what actually happened in those 4 seconds, what the crowd felt when the laughter stopped, and what most people standing at that railing will never know about the soldier on the other side of it. Because these aren't actors in red coats. They're active-duty soldiers, trained under the same standards as combat units, operating under real protocols that very clearly define when stillness ends and action begins. The boy didn't know that. He found out the hard way.